Hi everyone, welcome in or welcome back if you've already watched part 1 and 2 of the webinar series on mental exhaustion. So my name is Alexa Eitze. I am a registered psychotherapist qualifying and also a student intern at Creating Connection. So today we're going to be talking about carrying too much, understanding mental load and overthinking. And this is the last part of the webinar series. And we're going to talk about what mental load is, why our minds sometimes struggle to let go, how carrying too much can affect our well being, and also some practical strategies for creating more mental space. So, whether you're balancing work, school, family responsibilities, caregiving, or simply just feeling like your mind is always on, my hope is that you'll leave today with a better understanding of these experiences, a greater self compassion towards yourself, and also some practical tools that you could start using in your everyday life. And before we get started, there are just a few things that I would like to review about today's webinar. So, this webinar is intended for educational purposes only, and it's not a substitute for psychotherapy, counseling, medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. And as we discuss some of the topics today, you might find that the content resonates with your own experiences. So feel free to take a break at any moment if you need to. And also approach this webinar with curiosity and self compassion instead of judgment. A lot of these experiences, like constantly planning ahead, replaying conversations, worrying about the future, maybe feeling responsible for remembering and managing everything, these are actually common human responses, especially during times of stress or when we care deeply about the people and responsibilities in our lives. So the goal isn't to judge these patterns, but to better understand why they happen, recognize why they're becoming overwhelming, and also explore some practical strategies to create more mental space. So, like I said, my name is Alexa. I am a registered psychotherapist qualifying, and right now I am a therapist intern at Creating Connection. And I'm also in the process of finishing my graduate diploma in psychotherapy from the Université de Hearst. In my role, I support children, adolescents, adults who might be navigating challenges like stress, anxiety, low mood, self esteem concerns, life transitions, and some other mental health difficulties. And before I came into psychotherapy, I had some opportunities to work in a variety of helping and community focused roles. I've worked in education, child protection, mental health, community outreach, and a lot of these experiences have allowed me to work alongside people, right? Individuals, families who are navigating maybe stressful times or life transitions and challenges. And one of the reasons why I wanted to offer this webinar is I think a lot of people carry this invisible mental load that often goes unrecognized. It goes beyond the tasks that we complete every day. A lot of us have to plan those tasks, remember the tasks, organize the task, anticipate, problem solve, and worry about what might come next. So, this ongoing mental effort can be exhausting, even when it isn't always visible to other people. So, with that in mind, let's take a look at what we're covering today. So, we're going to start by exploring what mental load is, what it means, and why it can become exhausting. And then we'll start looking at what happens when thinking becomes exhausting. We'll talk about problem solving, overthinking, ruminating, and why some of these patterns can actually leave us feeling stuck instead of like we've solved something. Then we'll discuss why our brains sometimes have a hard time letting go, how they're designed, and also how they react to uncertainty. Then we will examine the cost of carrying too much, right? How this mental load and overthinking can affect our mood, concentration, relationships, our overall well being. And then we'll finish with some practical strategies to create more mental space, ways to prioritize what needs your attention, and also some exercises to practice self compassion. And throughout the webinar, there's also going to be some moments to pause and reflect on your own experiences, so you can actually start practicing these concepts and strategies right now. So you might just need a piece of paper and a pen, or just something to type on should be fine. Okay, so let's get started. We'll start with the foundation of the webinar. So what is mental load? Mental load refers to this invisible cognitive and emotional work that's involved in managing everyday life. And we often think about the tasks that we physically complete throughout the day, but mental load includes everything that's happening behind the scenes to make those tasks possible. So that includes things like planning ahead, remembering important information, organizing schedules, anticipating future needs, making decisions, solving problems, and also keeping track of all of these responsibilities. A lot of this work is happening continuously in the background of our minds, even when we're just sitting still or not actively completing tasks, right? If you think about just getting ready for supper, right? Preparing your supper, your dinner. The physical task might be the actual cooking of the meal and the cleaning afterwards, but the mental load began a lot earlier. It began when you decided what you wanted to make, right? Checking what ingredients you already have and which ones you need, remembering what to buy at the store, considering everybody's different schedules if you're cooking for multiple people, and everyone's different preferences as well. Maybe even thinking ahead to tomorrow's meals. So that same idea of all this background things that go unnoticed, it all applies to work, school, caregiving, and mostly all areas of your life. And so one thing to recognize is that mental load is often invisible. Other people usually only see the task that you completed, right? The meal that you physically made. While the planning, the remembering, anticipating, preparing, the decision making that happen, that often goes unnoticed. And because of this, a lot of people underestimate just how much mental effort they're carrying. So, although much of the research on mental load has focused on household responsibilities and caregiving, the concept applies much more broadly, right? Anybody who's juggling responsibilities, managing multiple roles, or constantly thinking ahead can experience this mental load. And recognizing the invisible work is the first step towards understanding why we feel mentally exhausted, even when it seems like we haven't physically done much. So let's make it a little bit more concrete by looking at what that actually looks like in everyday life. So research describes mental load as this ongoing work of anticipating, planning, organizing, and keeping track of all the responsibilities that we have every day. It often spans across multiple areas of life at once, right? Your home, school, work, relationships, caregiving, and that mental load it might look like tracking deadlines and schedules, remembering appointments and events, planning meals, 3 meals a day, every day a week, um, managing like daily tasks, home, school, work responsibilities, or even coordinating multiple responsibilities at the same time. It often means keeping this running mental to-do list of everything that needs to happen and trying not to let any of it fall through the cracks. This also involves thinking ahead, right? Not only for your needs, but for other people's needs. Maybe reminding a family member or a dependent about an appointment, anticipating what your child or your partner needs before they ask, coordinating plans with coworkers or friends, maybe just being the person everyone relies on to keep everything organized. And on top of these practical responsibilities, the mental load also includes emotional labor and caregiving, right? Maybe it's the checking in on other people, managing conflicts between friends or family, remembering important dates like birthdays and anniversaries, or maybe just carrying the emotional responsibility of supporting the people around you. What's important here is that the mental load isn't just about completing these tasks, it's about constantly keeping track of them. Much of this work happening in the background, often without anybody else noticing. And because our minds are continuously planning, remembering, and anticipating what's next, that's where that feeling of never truly being off comes from, even when we're trying to rest. So, when we talk about mental load, one of the most important things to understand is that it's not just about the number of tasks or responsibilities that you have, it's about this constant background activity happening in our minds. Many people describe this as always on thinking, right? Even when you're not actively doing something physical, part of your attention is still running in the background, keeping track of what needs to be done, what might be forgotten, or what could go wrong if something isn't managed properly. And over time, this becomes draining because there are often very few true opportunities for mental rest, even during downtime, like when you're watching TV, trying to relax, or go to bed. Your mind continues scanning, planning, problem solving in the background. And research shows that when your brain is under ongoing demand, it uses up mental resources, the same mental resources that are needed for focus, for decision making, emotional regulation, and everything else. So this means even though that maybe we're not physically doing something, that mental effort still requires energy and resources and can contribute to this feeling of fatigue, irritability, or being mentally full. And another important piece is that this type of effort is often invisible. So other people normally don't see the planning, the remembering, anticipating that happens internally, which can sometimes actually make it feel like we shouldn't be tired. But from a psychological perspective, your brain has been working continuously in the background. So when people describe feeling exhausted by their thoughts or like they're never able to fully switch off, this is a very understandable response to that mental and emotional load. It's not a sign of doing something wrong, but a reflection of how much mental processing is actually happening. So now I'm kind of wondering, what else does everybody have going on in the background right now? Right? What's taking up space in your mind right here in this moment? So this exercise is called a brain dump, and the goal of the activity is not to organize, prioritize, or solve anything, but it's about getting things out of your head and onto paper or your screen so you can see what you're currently carrying mentally, just noticing what's there. So take a few moments to write down everything that feels like it's taking up space in your mind. It might include tasks, reminders, things you're worried about, responsibilities that you're keeping track of. It might be like as small as remembering to reply to a message, or a large life responsibility, or a big concern that you have. There's no right or wrong way to do it. And you don't need to organize your thoughts or to make sense of them. Just let them flow out, let them come out as they are. The purpose here is simply to become more aware, not to judge them. So you can take a few moments of time to practice this exercise, and you could pause here. Okay, so now that you've had a few moments to complete the brain dump exercise, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that experience. For a lot of people, this exercise can actually bring a sense of awareness, sometimes even surprise, about just how much is actually being carried mentally at any given moment. And there's no need to hold on to or analyze what came up for you, but the purpose here was to simply externalize some of those thoughts and create a bit more space to see them from a different perspective. Now you could take a moment to just gently set that list aside. There's nothing that you need to do with it right here, right now. In this moment, you are just here in this webinar. Okay, so this brings us into the next part of today's webinar. We're going to explore what happens when thinking becomes exhausting. So Let's look into a little further into some of these different patterns that people commonly experience. Oftentimes, our brains use a problem solving thinking pattern, and I think this is what most of us are familiar with, right? It's usually focused on finding a solution to something specific, and it tends to move in a clear direction. It often leads to action. Um, even if the solution is small or imperfect, and it helps you move forward. But when you're under stress or when you're carrying a lot mentally, that thinking doesn't always stay in problem solving mode. One pattern that can happen is overthinking, right? This is when our thoughts actually start circling around the same idea or situation without really moving towards resolution. It might feel like you're trying to figure something out, but instead of clarity, you might end up feeling more stuck or even more drained. Another pattern is worrying, which is usually focused on the future, right? So these are thoughts that often show up like, oh, what if this, or what if, you're trying to anticipate everything that could go wrong or preparing for uncertainty. And while this sometimes does feel like preparation, it also sometimes increases anxiety instead of giving you that feeling of certainty. And another pattern is rumination. So this tends to be more focused on the past. It's when our mind replays situations, conversations, decisions, often with this sense of, I should have done this. Why didn't I do this? And instead of helping us learn or move forward, this rumination often keeps us emotionally stuck in things that have already happened. So, from a psychological perspective, these patterns are often connected to stress and cognitive overload. And when your brain is under pressure, it tends to default to this repetitive, threat focused thinking, even when it isn't helpful in solving the situation. So, the goal here isn't to label your thoughts as good or as bad thoughts, but to start noticing the function behind these different types of thinking, right? Noticing whether your thinking pattern is helping you move forward, or if maybe it's keeping you in that same mental space and not really getting anywhere. So, if we make this a little bit more concrete, because I think a lot of us experience these types of thinking patterns without realizing, um, the first one is mental rehearsal, right? Maybe your mind keeps replaying situations before or after they happen, like practicing an upcoming conversation over and over, or rereading an email or a text just to make sure that it sounded right. Another pattern is seeking certainty. This can look like spending a long time researching or maybe second guessing a decision because it feels uncomfortable to move forward without being 100% sure. Perfectionism often shows up in everyday ways. Things like rewriting a message several times, or maybe feeling like a task isn't finished unless it's done exactly right. You might also notice thoughts like, oh, did I say the wrong thing? Did I do the wrong thing after a conversation or an event, right? Replaying what happened and wondering how you came across to the other people. Or maybe thoughts like, oh, just one more time. I'm just going to check one more time when you're checking or reviewing, like rereading an email, checking your phone again, going over a task one more time just to feel more certain. And when we experience stress, it can shift our thinking towards this repetitive threat focused pattern. Um, and although these habits are meant to protect us or to prevent mistakes, they can also end up keeping us mentally stuck instead. So the goal isn't to eliminate these thoughts, but to recognize them so you can start noticing when your mind is solving a problem versus simply just looping. And so now you might be wondering, if overthinking, worry, and mental rehearsal feel so draining, why does our brain keep doing them? Well, the important thing to understand is in the moment, these thought patterns feel helpful. even if they become unhelpful over time. So the reason is that they create this illusion of control. When something feels uncertain or overwhelming, our mind doesn't like that feeling. It doesn't like not knowing what's going to happen next. So it tries to reduce that discomfort by thinking more, planning more, or maybe mentally running through different scenarios, even if nothing changes externally. It can feel like we're doing something useful or productive. And these patterns also feel like preparation, right? When you replay a conversation or like thinking through what you might say or imagining different outcomes, it gives you this sense that you're getting ready for something. You're preparing. It can feel like you're reducing the chance of being caught off guard. And in the short term, this kind of thinking does temporarily reduce that uncertainty. It creates this brief sense of relief like, okay, I've thought this through, I've covered all the angles, everything will be fine. But that relief often doesn't last because if the situation is uncertain or maybe emotionally loaded, the mind is going to tend to go back to it again and restart the cycle and look at everything from new perspectives again. So over time, what often ends up happening is that instead of feeling more settled and relieved, people end up feeling more mentally active, more alert, more on edge, and sometimes more anxious than before. So even though these thinking patterns can feel helpful in the moment, they often keep us stuck in cycles of thinking instead of bringing real resolution or calm. So now that we've looked at why these patterns can feel helpful in the short term, even when they're draining over time, this next section, we're going to explore what's happening underneath these experiences and why our thinking just doesn't seem to switch off. Okay, so a helpful way to understand this is that your brain actually has this built in threat detection system. So, this system is constantly scanning your environment and your thoughts for anything that might signal risk, feel uncertain, or potential problems. And from an evolutionary perspective, this system developed to keep us safe, to keep us alive. Our brains evolved in environments where quickly noticing danger, like threats in the environment or changes that could signal risk, that was essential for survival. And so your brain is basically designed to keep you alive, right? It's designed to prioritize your safety above everything else. So this is where that idea of better safe than sorry comes in. If there's even a small chance that something could go wrong, your brain would rather stay alert and think it through just to prepare, just in case. In modern life, though, the threats that we experience are often not immediate physical danger. They sometimes are, but not often. Um, Instead, they tend to be social, emotional, internal, right? Things like worrying about what we said in a conversation, uncertainty about the future, or feeling responsible for multiple tasks and expectations. So, when you find yourself overthinking, replaying situations, or trying to mentally prepare for every possible outcome, this is often your brain trying to protect you. It's attempting to reduce uncertainty and prevent potential problems before they even happen. And the challenge is that this system doesn't always know the difference between real danger and everyday uncertainty. So it can become overactive, right? Treating thoughts like the what ifs and unfinished tasks as if they require immediate attention. Understanding this can be helpful because it shifts the question from what's wrong with me for thinking like this, why can't I let it go, to what is my brain maybe trying to protect me from right now. And often the answer is that your brain is trying to help, it's just a little bit overprotective. So now that we've understood what the brain is trying to protect us, the next question becomes, why do these thoughts keep coming back, even maybe when we don't want them to? So, a big part of this has to do with how the mind responds to anything that it views as unfinished. So, when something feels incomplete, whether it's a task, a decision, conversation, or even maybe a worry, the brain tends to hold on to it. It treats these things that are unfinished as something that still needs attention. So, even when we're trying to move on, the brain, the mind, brings it back into awareness again and again. Another factor is this need for certainty. The brain is always trying to reduce uncertainty. And when it can't fully resolve something, it often keeps revisiting it in an attempt to figure it out. So, this is why we might replay conversations, recheck decisions, or maybe think through different scenarios over and over. And stress also plays an important role here. When we're under this stress, our cognitive system, our mental system, becomes more activated and focused on potential concerns. This can increase that kind of mental noise, meaning that there's more thoughts maybe competing for your attention, and it becomes harder for the mind to naturally settle or let these things go. And finally, many of these experiences are actually connected to caring. So when something matters to us, right, our relationships, responsibilities, performance, or the well being of other people, our brain is more likely to keep it active in the background. In many ways, when we care deeply, it can also mean that we're carrying more mentally because the mind prioritizes what feels important or meaningful to you. So when thoughts keep coming back, it's not because your mind is stuck, malfunctioning, or broken, or that there's something wrong with you. It's often because something feels unresolved, uncertain, or important enough that your brain is still trying to make full sense of it. So the goal isn't necessarily to force these thoughts away, but to understand maybe why they keep coming back in the first place. There's another pattern that often shows up alongside mental load and overthinking, and that's self criticism. So, when our minds feel busy or overwhelmed, it's easy to turn that frustration inward, right? You might think, why can't I stop overthinking? Or something's wrong with me. But if we looked at those thoughts a little bit differently, maybe instead of asking, why can't I stop overthinking, you might remind yourself that your brain, your mind is trying to help you. And instead of thinking something's wrong with me, you can recognize that what's happening is a normal human stress response. And the same shift can happen with mental load, right? Instead of saying, oh, I'm so disorganized, when am I ever going to get my stuff together? You might say, like, right now I am carrying a lot. I need to take a short break and maybe come back to this later on with a more sound, clear mind. And this is what self compassion looks like. It means responding to yourself with the same understanding and kindness that you would offer a friend or somebody that you care deeply about, especially during these difficult, stressful moments. It's important to remember that your brain isn't broken. These patterns are understandable, and your mind is trying to protect you. But sometimes that protection becomes overprotection, which leads to overthinking, perfectionism, or difficulty letting go. And the goal isn't to eliminate these difficult thoughts or to force positive thinking or optimism. It's to change how you relate to these thoughts, right? When you can respond to your own thoughts with curiosity and compassion instead of criticism, you can often reduce that extra pressure that you're placing on yourself and create more space in your mind to respond thoughtfully instead of reacting automatically. All right, so now I'm inviting you to take a few moments to practice this self compassion. So, if you take a few moments to think about a time when you noticed yourself overthinking, maybe feeling mentally overwhelmed or carrying a heavy mental load, it doesn't have to be something major, right? It could be something as simple as replaying a conversation, maybe worrying about forgetting something or feeling like you had too much on your plate. And once you've had that situation in mind, maybe write it down, write down the self-critical thought that you had. Maybe it was, I should have handled this better, or I'm so disorganized, or why can't I stop overthinking, right? What was the self-critical thought? And next, you're going to reframe that thought using a more self-compassionate response. So instead of criticizing yourself, imagine responding with the same kindness and the same understanding that you would offer somebody that you deeply care about, right? If they were in your shoes, what would you be saying to them, right? Often, instead of saying, I should be able to manage this better, it might turn into, I'm carrying a lot right now, and it makes sense that this feels overwhelming. So you can take a few moments to work through the exercise. There's no right or wrong answers. It's simply an opportunity to notice your inner dialogue and to practice responding to yourself with greater compassion. So you can pause here if you need more time. And also take a moment to notice what that activity felt like. You don't have to keep working on the exercise or solve everything that came up. And the goal wasn't to make these difficult thoughts disappear, but to simply practice responding to them and responding to yourself with more kindness and understanding. If there was anything that stood out to you, you can take that with you and let go of the rest for now as we move into the next section. All right, so now we are going to explore the cost of carrying too much. So let's start by looking at what mental load and overthinking might feel like in everyday life when it becomes too much. When you're under this ongoing stress or mental strain, it doesn't just affect how you think, it also affects how you feel, how you focus, and how you function in your day to day. A common sign is that mental exhaustion, right? It's not just this physical tiredness, but the feeling like your mind is full, maybe slowed down or constantly on, even when you're trying to rest. Another sign is difficulty concentrating, right? Or brain fog. When your brain is already managing a lot internally, it becomes harder to focus on one task at a time. You might find yourself rereading things, maybe losing track of tasks, feeling mentally scattered, forgetting things also. Decision fatigue is also very common. Even small decisions like what to eat, what to do first, or how to respond to something, they can start feeling overwhelming even when your mental load is already high. Irritability can also show up, right? When your mind is stretched thin, there's often less capacity for patience or emotional regulation. So these small things can feel more frustrating or overwhelming than they normally would. And finally, sleep disruption is also a frequent experience. So, a lot of people notice that even when they're physically tired, their mind continues to be active at night, maybe replaying the day or planning tomorrow, thinking through unresolved concerns. And taken all together, these signs are not indicators that there's something wrong with you, right? They're often signals that your cognitive, your mental, and emotional system is carrying more than it has capacity for in the moment. In other words, these are common human responses to sustained mental load and stress. They're not personal failures. Okay, so now let's zoom out and see how these signs show up across different areas of life. So, when we experience ongoing stress or that mental overload, it doesn't stay contained in one part of our experience. It actually tends to ripple outward and affect multiple areas of functioning, which gives us this sort of ripple effect. So, one of the first areas is relationships, right? When somebody's mentally overloaded, you might feel more distracted, emotionally drained, or maybe less present in conversations. This can sometimes show up as irritability, maybe lower patience, especially in moments that require emotional energy or problem solving or active listening. Small misunderstandings or everyday frustrations might feel more intense simply because there's less mental space available to regulate in the moment. Mental load can also impact school or work. It might become harder to concentrate, stay organized, or complete tasks efficiently. Even when someone is trying their best, it can feel like their mental capacity is already stretched thin, which makes productivity more difficult. Self care is also often affected as well. It's often one of the first things that we remove from our to do list, right? Things like rest, well balanced meals, exercise or movement, or just basic daily routines can start to feel like one more thing I have to do or one more thing I need to manage instead of something that's restorative. Leisure and enjoyment, these can also decrease. Activities that used to feel relaxing or enjoyable might feel harder to access because the mind is still preoccupied or fatigued. And finally, physical health can be impacted, right? Experiencing chronic stress is associated with fatigue, sleep disruptions, tension, and other stress related symptoms, especially when your body stays in this prolonged state of activation. And when we put this all together, you start realizing that mental load isn't just about thinking and what's happening in the brain, right? It influences how we relate to other people, how much patience we have in difficult moments, how we function, and how we also recover in day to day life. This is what we mean by the ripple effect. When the mind is carrying too much, it doesn't stay contained in one area, it spreads out into multiple parts of our experience. So, what does that feel like when mental load and overthinking continue over a long period of time? Well, that ongoing stress keeps the brain in a more activated state. So instead of fully switching off and recovering, your mind feels like it's constantly on, even during rest or downtime. One pretty common experience is feeling mentally busy all the time. Even when there's nothing urgent happening, your mind keeps thinking, planning, anticipating, or replaying different concerns. And over time, this makes it harder to enjoy activities that would normally feel relaxing because part of your mental energy is still tied up somewhere else. And emotional depletion can also set in, right? When there's so much energy being spent thinking and worrying, there's often less capacity for emotional regulation. Small frustrations might start to feel a lot bigger because your emotional reserves are already running low. And finally, all of this creates this general sense of overwhelm, not because of one specific thing, but because everything starts to feel like too much to hold at once. And I think this shows us the importance of recovery, right? Just like our bodies need rest after physical effort, our minds also need breaks from this constant mental activity. And without that recovery, even small things can start to feel heavier than they normally would. The good news is that although we can't get rid of stress, we can't get rid of the responsibilities, or we can't get rid of the uncertainty, we can change how we respond to those things. So let's look at some strategies that can help lighten the mental load and also support your overall well being. So, one of the simplest ways to create more mental space is honestly to stop expecting our brains to hold on to it all. When we're carrying a heavy mental load, it's common to keep this like running to-do list of appointments and worries and reminders, and we're going through it over and over and over because we're afraid that we're going to forget something. The more that we try and keep everything in our minds, the more mental energy it requires. So instead, if we can start externalizing these thoughts, so in other words, move them from into our minds onto something that is outside of us, this might look like doing a brain dump, like we practiced today at the start of the webinar, right? At the end of your day, just dumping all of your thoughts and worries onto a piece of paper. Maybe keeping a running to-do list on physical paper or on an app. Using your calendar for appointments and deadlines, scheduled events. Writing yourself notes throughout the day. I'll deal with this later. I'll use it during my worry time. And even keeping a journal for all your worries, right? You can record these worries instead of repeatedly thinking through them. And the goal isn't to become organized for the sake of productivity, but to reduce the amount of information that your brain has to actively hold on to at any given moment. If you think of it kind of like carrying groceries, if you were to try and hold every single item that is on your long grocery list all in your hands at once, eventually it's going to become too hard and exhausting, and you're going to start losing items, right? So being able to set those items down somewhere safe, like a cart, doesn't make them disappear. It just means that you don't have to carry all that weight at once. And our brains work in a similar way. The more that we can rely on systems outside of our minds, the more cognitive and mental space that we can create for focusing, resting, and being present. And once we've taken some of the information out of our heads, the next step is to think about how we're using that mental energy. Our time, attention, cognitive energy, these things are all limited, right? They're mental resources that we only have so much of. And when we're trying to give everything, every task, every responsibility, the same amount of attention, it's easy to become overwhelmed. One helpful tool is a prioritization matrix that you see on screen. So this reminds us that not everything deserves the same amount of time or energy, and it also allows us to sort through some of the things on our minds. So in the top left corner, you have things that are urgent and also important for you. So these are things that you would do now. And then in the top right corner, these are things that are important to you, but maybe not urgent right here in this moment. So these are things that I can schedule to do later. And then in the bottom left, these are things that are urgent, but maybe not important to you. So these are things that you could assign to somebody else when it's possible and delegate. And then the bottom right corner, these are tasks that are not urgent and also not important to you. And it's to give yourself permission to postpone the task or to just let it go completely if it's not important. Another way to reduce mental load is by limiting your decision fatigue. So all the small decisions we make throughout the day, they add up. So if we can create routines, plan ahead, or make reoccurring tasks more automated, this can actually free up mental energy for the decisions that matter most. It's also important to try delegating when possible. We don't have to carry every responsibility ourselves, and sharing tasks when it's possible can reduce the load for everybody. And also, learning to say no when needed is another form of protecting your mental energy. I think here it's important to remember that every time that you say yes to do something, it's going to require time and attention and energy. So, setting boundaries helps you ensure that you have enough time and energy and attention for what matters most to you. So, there will be days where you don't have time or energy or attention to give away, and it's okay to say no on those days. We are not designed to be able to take everything on all the time. And finally, remembering that sometimes good enough really is enough. Not every tasks need to be done perfectly, and asking yourself, does this need to be done perfectly, or does it just need to be done? That can help reduce some of that unnecessary pressure. And the goal isn't to do less, but to be more intentional about where we're choosing to use those limited mental resources. And as we're coming to the final strategy here, I just want to focus on something that a lot of us struggle with, and that is uncertainty. So, throughout the webinar, we've talked about how our minds are naturally searching for answers. They are searching to predict what might happen next, and they replay situations to feel more prepared. The challenge is that life rarely gives us 100% certainty. So, one helpful shift is actually to accept that uncertainty is a normal part of life. And that acceptance doesn't mean that you have to like uncertainty or you have to give up everything else. It simply means that recognizing that not every question has an answer right now, and not every outcome has or can be controlled. Self compassion also plays an important role here, right? When you notice yourself worrying or overthinking, if you can try responding with curiosity instead of criticism, right? Instead of asking, why am I still thinking about this? You might say, it makes sense that my mind is looking for certainty because this is something that I deeply care about. It's something that's very important to me. Another helpful strategy is worry scheduling. So, setting aside maybe 10 to 15 minutes every day to intentionally think about your worries. And if there's a worry that comes up outside of that scheduled time, you can make note of it and remind yourself, I'll come back to this during my scheduled worry time. And finally, practicing flexible thinking. So when you catch yourself maybe assuming the worst of a situation or believing that there's only one possible outcome, you can ask yourself, what else could happen? Is there maybe another way to look at this? The goal isn't to force optimism or positivity, but it's to make room for more than one possibility. And the goal also isn't to get rid of uncertainty because that would be unrealistic. But it's to become more comfortable with the uncertainty and to also trust that you can cope with whatever comes next. Okay, so this is the last exercise, and as we're coming to the end of the webinar, we're going to just bring everything together in this exercise. So think of one thing that's maybe taking up mental space. Maybe it's a task, a worry, an expectation, something you just keep thinking about. And we're going to work it through 3 steps. So we're going to sort it, we're going to shift it, and then we're going to set it down. So you'll start by asking yourself, is this something that you need to solve right now? Or is this something that I can take action on right now? If not, is this something that I can plan or schedule for later? If not, is this something that's maybe outside of my control? And then you're going to shift it. So, can I approach this differently? What is the smallest realistic next step? Can this wait until later? Can I soften the pressure I'm putting on myself? Is there a good enough version? And then you're going to set it down. So notice whether maybe there's anything that you don't need to carry in this moment, right? Asking yourself, can I let this be for now? Is there maybe something I need to practice tolerating, like tolerating uncertainty or tolerating that not everything is in our control? So you could take a few minutes to pause and practice this. And also remember that the goal with this exercise isn't to solve everything, it's to simply notice what you're carrying and see whether one small shift could maybe make a little bit more mental space. And if you're able to identify something that's actionable, right, a next step, you might have that next step in place. But if it's something that maybe can be planned, your mind may not need to keep holding on to it and reminding you about it. And if it's maybe something that's outside of your control, you can practice allowing that uncertainty instead of trying to solve it. So, what we're practicing isn't avoidance, it's flexibility, learning when something needs action, when it needs planning, and when it's okay to just set it down, set it aside, at least just for now. Even these small intentional shifts, these can create more mental space over time. So I have put together a little toolkit on information overload for everybody who's joined today. You can access it by scanning the QR code. And there's about 7 different worksheets that you can work through. And they help support you. So the workbook can be used to your liking. You can complete it all in one go, or maybe just use it as like a check-in resource. that you can implement in your life to help you recognize like maybe some of those signs, help you sort through your tasks or your worries, and build some healthier strategies. And also, there's some extra resources for more learning as well. And we've also put together a 7 minute mindful self compassion pause. It's a guided meditation for mental exhaustion. So this is something that you could use at any point in your day, the start, the middle, the end of your day, whenever you might feel like maybe you're carrying too much or you feel like you need a moment to take a break or rest. Okay, so we're at the end of the webinar, and I'd like to leave you with a few little takeaways. So, first, mental load is absolutely real, even when it's invisible. Um, just because other people may not see it all the time, it doesn't mean that it's not taking away from your time and your energy. Next, your brain is trying to protect you, not work against you. It just might be a little overprotective at times. Third, you don't have to carry everything in your mind. Take the time to externalize it, write it down, make it somewhere more permanent so your mind doesn't have to keep carrying it for you. And lastly, these small intentional changes can create more mental space, and it adds up over time. Okay. So, thank you all for joining me today and taking the time to learn more about mental load and overthinking. I hope that this webinar has given you a better understanding of why mental load happens and some practical strategies that you can use in your own life. Also, just want to acknowledge that taking this time to reflect on your own well being is important, and mental load is often invisible. So, simply recognizing the weight that you've been carrying is a really meaningful first step towards creating more balance and self compassion. And today's presentation and the previous presentations can all be found on YouTube channel. And if you want to ever revisit it or maybe share the material with someone else. And so thank you again for being here and for investing in your own well-being. I wish you all the very best and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.